Welcome back. So the next thing we have to discuss around functions, now that we've seen the basic syntax to define one, is how do we return values from functions? And before we actually see how we do that, to see the syntax, let's just talk about what it means to return a value. So here I have a simple, it's an empty file, very simple. And I'm calling it return.py. You can call it whatever you want. Let's define a simple function called print square of 2. Let's do square of 7. There we go. So very trivial and silly, but if we wanted to do this, we could just print 7 times 7, or we could do 7 squared, either way. Let's do it like this, just because it's a bit different. And then of course, I could execute print square of 7 with parentheses. And what do we expect to see? Let's run it. So that's Python 3, return.py, and it prints 49. Okay, so that's all great. That should be review. But what if we have something like this? We've seen this all the time. So we have a list of numbers. And we do something like this. Length equals len of nums. Like that, where we're actually setting a variable equal to the result of running a function len. And if we look at length, it's storing the number 4. So what's happening here is that this function runs, it doesn't print anything, but it's actually returning a value that we're capturing in this variable. So we see this all the time. Or, we do something like pop something off of here. So we could do last item equals nums.pop. Once again, we don't see anything, and nums is shorter now, but last item stores the value of 4, which is what we popped off. So how do we achieve this with our code? Let's define another function, and we'll just call this one square of 7. And you might think all we have to do is this. Instead of printing something, we're just going to run 7 squared. Let's try it, and we'll do a variable called result equals square of 7, whatever comes back when we execute it. And then let's do a print result. And I'll comment out our other print. I'll comment both of these out. What happens now? So if I execute it, what do I get? None. So what's happening here? Well, the answer is nothing is being returned still. By default, just running some code, doing math, whatever we do, defining a string in here, that doesn't return any value out. And we have to be very explicit when we want something to be returned. There's a magic keyword, which, surprise, surprise, is just return. So we write return, and then whatever we want to send out of this function. So we haven't talked about inputs yet. That's coming up next. But this is the output side of things. So this function always returns a square of 7 every single time. And if we wanted to capture it, now it should work. Our result variable will capture whatever has been returned. Let's see. Run it again. There we go. We've now returned 7 times 7 and captured it in the result variable. So here's a slide that demonstrates that. By returning hi, the string hi, if we save the result of say hi, the function name, the result of executing it in the variable greeting, greeting is equal to hi. So a couple things to know about the keyword return. It exits the function. So let me demonstrate that now. If I go back here and I'll do a print afterwards that just says, I am after the return, just like this, and we run it, you'll see we don't get that print statement, even though it's part of the function. As soon as our code runs, so the first thing that happens is square of 7 is executed, and the first line is return 49. And that ends the entire function. It's done, it short circuits it, we never move on to here. But if we swap them, or instead, let me do another one up here that just says, I am before, like this, and I run it now, we get I am before the return, then the return. Cool. Next is the fact that whatever we place after the return keyword is what is returned. And we're not limited to returning a single item. That's all we'll do for now, but you can use a tuple to return more than one piece of information from a function. And finally, it pops the function off the call stack. So we haven't talked about the call stack. We're not going to really in much detail right now, but the main idea is that the call stack is sort of like a to-do list for all the things, all the tasks that Python has to do in executing your code. And every time there's a new function call, it gets added to this stack. It's, do this, then this, then this, and then this. And by popping it off, it moves on to the next thing. So that's a very, very simplistic explanation. I don't want to get too bogged down in it, but you can learn a lot more about it at this URL or by Googling it. But I also recommend that you don't panic about it yet or ever. It's not really something you need to know. It's just a good thing to know that happens behind the scenes, but it's all hidden from view. Okay, so just to wrap that up, the return keyword is how we actually export or get a value out of a function so we can capture it in a variable later, or we could pass it into another function. We could do something like print, which is itself another function. So this runs first, it returns a value 49, and it's basically the same thing. It's just printing 49, which is itself a function. Cool. So we'll leave it off here. In the next video, we're going to define a very short function that will help us with coin tosses. I know, not the sexiest thing ever.